Have you ever heard of an empire that conquered the known world, only to vanish into thin air just 3 years later? It sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, but it's a real historical mystery that has puzzled archaeologists and historians for centuries. This is the story of the Akkadian Empire, humanity's very first empire, and its baffling sudden collapse. Picture this. It's over 4,300 years ago, in ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. A man named Sargon of Akkad, a figure of legendary status, rises from humble beginnings to unite the fractious city-states of Sumer under a single banner. This wasn't just another kingdom, it was a revolution. Sargon created the world's first professional army, the first centralized bureaucracy, and the first postal service. His empire stretched from the Persian Gulf all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, a vast territory of diverse peoples, languages, and cultures, all ruled from his magnificent, yet-to-be-found capital city, Akkad. The Akkadian Empire was a powerhouse. They standardized weights and measures, fostering trade on an unprecedented scale. Their art reached new heights of realism and sophistication. For over a century, under Sargon and his successors, especially his grandson Naram-Sin, who declared himself a living god, the empire seemed invincible. They were the center of the world, a beacon of power and innovation. So, what on earth could bring such a mighty empire to its knees? Not in a century, not in a decade, but in a mere 3 years. The story of its fall is as dramatic as its rise. After the reign of the powerful Naram-Sin, the historical records get fuzzy. A text known as the Sumerian king list mentions the next ruler, Shar-Kali-Shari, and then descends into chaos. It asks a haunting question: who was king? Who was not king? It then lists 4 rulers who reigned for a combined total of only 3 years, a period of intense instability and collapse. After that, the Akkadian Empire, as a unified entity, simply disappears from the records. The cities it once ruled became independent again, and the grand imperial experiment was over. How could this happen? 4 years, the leading theory was invasion. The Gushans, a tribal people from the nearby Zagros Mountains, were traditionally blamed. Ancient texts, written by the Sumerians who came after, paint the Gushans as barbaric destroyers who brought chaos and famine. They called them a stinging serpent of the mountains who knew no kingship. It's a compelling story, a civilized empire brought low by so-called barbarians. It was the accepted explanation for decades. But as with many historical mysteries, the real story is far more complex and fascinating. In the 1990s, a new kind of detective entered the scene, a geoarchaeologist named Harvey Weiss. While excavating an ancient city in northern Syria called Tel Leilan, which was once part of the Akkadian Empire, he found something strange. Around 2200 BCE, the same time the empire collapsed, the city was abruptly and completely abandoned. The soil layers told a story not of swords and spears, but of dust and drought. Weiss and his team analyzed the soil and found a massive spike in wind-blown dust and a near total absence of earthworm activity, a clear sign of aridification. The rains had stopped. This discovery led to a groundbreaking and controversial theory. The Akkadian Empire wasn't primarily destroyed by invaders. It was killed by climate change. A sudden, severe, and prolonged megadrought swept across the region. Imagine a drought lasting not just a few years, but for up to 300 years. The fertile fields of northern Mesopotamia, the empire's breadbasket, would have turned to dust. Without food, the massive urban populations of cities like Tel Leilan couldn't be sustained. People abandoned the cities in a desperate search for water and food, leading to a massive societal collapse. Evidence from around the world seems to back this up. Ice cores from Greenland, sediment layers from the Gulf of Oman, and lake beds in Africa all show signs of a major global climate event around the same time, now known as the 4.2 kilo-year event. The theory suggests that the northern half of the Akkadian Empire, which relied on rainfall for agriculture, was decimated by the drought. This would have caused a massive wave of climate refugees to flee south, overwhelming the southern cities that relied on irrigation from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This internal chaos would have been the perfect opportunity for groups like the Gushans to move in. They weren't necessarily a mighty invading army, but perhaps opportunistic raiders taking advantage of a crumbling state. The empire, weakened from within by famine, civil unrest, and a refugee crisis, couldn't defend its borders. Its authority evaporated. The God King was powerless against a foe he couldn't see, the changing climate. The 4 kings in 3 years suddenly make sense. They were likely competing warlords or desperate leaders trying to hold on to power in a kingdom that was literally drying up and blowing away. Think about the implications. The world's first empire, a model of human organization and power, was brought down not by a rival army, but by an environmental catastrophe. It's a humbling reminder of how dependent even the most advanced civilizations are on a stable climate. The story of Sargon's dream turning to dust serves as a stark warning from the distant past. Of course, the debate isn't entirely settled. Some historians argue that the climate change theory is too simplistic. They point out that some cities in the south seem to weather the crisis better than others, and that political infighting and the inherent difficulty of ruling such a diverse empire were equally, if not more, important factors. They argue that blaming everything on the weather ignores the human element, the political decisions, the rebellions, and the structural weaknesses of the Akkadian state. Perhaps the truth is a combination of all these factors. A powerful, but perhaps overstretched, empire was hit by a once-in-a-millennium climate disaster. The resulting famine and social breakdown created a power vacuum that ambitious rivals and external groups were all too happy to fill. It was a perfect storm of political, social, and environmental crises that conspired to wipe humanity's first great empire off the map. And what about Akkad, the lost capital? To this day, no one knows where it is. Archaeologists have been searching for it for over a century. Finding it would be like finding the Holy Grail of Mesopotamian archaeology. It could hold the definitive answers to the empire's sudden demise. The texts buried in its ruins might tell us the story from the Akkadian perspective, not just from those who came after. Did they know their world was ending? Did they try to fight it? The secrets of the world's first imperial collapse are still buried somewhere beneath the sands of Iraq, waiting to be discovered. The mysterious fall of the Akkadian Empire is more than just an ancient history lesson. It's a story about ambition, power, and fragility. It shows us that no matter how strong or advanced we think we are always part of a larger natural system. The ghost of Akkad haunts us with a timeless question. If the world's first empire could vanish so quickly, what does that say about our own? Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the deep past. If you found this mystery as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more dives into history's greatest enigmas.